A single father was tricked into a blind date with a girl with Down syndrome, but when she asked, "Do you think I still deserve to be happy?" his answer changed everything. A true love story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up and comment where you are watching from. The clock at Mr. James's bakery struck exactly 2 in the afternoon when Sarah Johnson adjusted her brown hair for the 10th time, which insisted on escaping from her ponytail. At 22, she had developed a meticulous routine for Saturdays, waking up at 7, helping her grandmother Grace with her medications, enjoying a hearty breakfast that always included warm French bread with butter and guava jam, and then heading to her job at Mr. James's bakery, where she had become indispensable over the last 3 years. But this Saturday was different, very different. "Grandma, are you sure I should go?" Sarah asked for the 5th time, nervously stirring the coffee she had prepared in the small but cozy kitchen of the 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. The peeling walls told stories of decades, and the smell of coffee mixed with the jasmine perfume that Grace cultivated on the balcony. The grandmother, a 78-year-old woman who had arrived in New York in the 60s with just 1 suitcase and a lot of determination, lifted her eyes from the embroidery she was working on to supplement her meager retirement. Her calloused fingers, which had prepared thousands of meals in family homes, now trembled slightly, but still managed to create delicate flowers on the fabric. "Sweetheart, how many times do I have to repeat this? You are smart, hard-working, and have a heart bigger than this entire apartment," Grace said, her voice carrying the soft accent of rural North Carolina that not even 5 decades in New York had managed to erase completely. "If that man can't see that, the problem is his, not yours." Sarah sighed deeply, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied her whenever she thought about meeting someone new. Her Down syndrome had never been a secret or a source of shame at home. Grace had taken care of that from day one when Sarah's parents, young and scared, decided they couldn't handle the responsibility. "But what if he looks at me and runs away, Grandma? What if he thinks he was tricked?" The words came out in a barely audible whisper, revealing the fear that Sarah had carried for years, being rejected before even having the chance to show who she really was. Grace set the embroidery aside and walked over to her granddaughter, her slippers making the familiar sound on the worn ceramic floor. She held Sarah's face in her calloused hands, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Listen here, my dear. Your biological father looked me in the eyes and said you would never be anything in life, that you would just be a burden." The elderly woman's voice trembled slightly, but maintained its firmness. "Today you work, pay your own bills, have more friends at the bakery than I had in my entire life, and can do mental math faster than many accountants out there. If someone can't see your worth, it's because they don't deserve to be in your life." Sarah hugged her grandmother, inhaling the familiar scent of talcum powder and coffee that always calmed her. Grace had been a mother, father, teacher, and best friend all these years. She had faced prejudiced school principals, ignorant neighbors, and even family members who suggested that Sarah should be taken care of in an institution. Each battle had made the grandmother stronger, and Sarah more determined to prove that her condition did not define her abilities. "Now go on or you'll be late," Grace said, giving a gentle pat on Sarah's shoulder. "And remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone, just be yourself." Sarah grabbed her red purse, a Christmas gift from Mr. James, and checked for the 3rd time to see if she had enough money for coffee and the bus fare back. Financial independence was a point of pride for her, even though her salary at the bakery was modest. Every dollar she earned represented her autonomy, her ability to choose, her dignity. The bus ride from Brooklyn to Williamsburg took 40 minutes, just enough time for Sarah to mentally review everything she knew about David, the man she had been chatting with online for the past 3 weeks. He'd been kind, asked about her job, and showed genuine interest in her bakery stories. Of course, she had been careful, not mentioning her condition directly, but she also hadn't lied about anything important. The Culture Cafe was located on a busy corner with little tables on the sidewalk and the aroma of roasted coffee wafting down the street. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, chose a table near the window, and ordered a latte and a cinnamon roll. The waitress, a young woman with colorful hair and piercings, was friendly and natural, treating Sarah like any other customer. "First time here?" the waitress asked while serving the coffee. "Yes, it is. I'm nervous. I'm going to meet someone," Sarah admitted, stirring the sugar with more force than necessary. "Oh, how exciting! A romantic date?" Sarah blushed slightly. "I don't know yet. I hope so." While waiting, Sarah observed the street's activity. Young people on skateboards passed in groups, couples walked hand in hand, and families with children headed to the nearby park. It was a typical summer Saturday in New York, with the strong December sun warming the sidewalks and creating cozy shadows under the awnings of the shops. At exactly 3 o'clock, Sarah saw a man stop in front of the cafe, check his phone, and look around with an expression she couldn't decipher. It was David. Without a doubt, the photo. The profile didn't lie. Tall, dark hair with a few grey strands at the temples, light blue dress shirt and jeans. Handsome, but with a stiffness in his shoulders that suggested tension. When their eyes met through the glass, Sarah waved shyly. David hesitated for a few seconds that felt eternal to Sarah, then entered the cafe. "Sarah?" he asked, approaching the table with measured steps. "It's me," she replied, standing up to greet him. "You must be David." The awkwardness was palpable. David looked around as if searching for someone else, and Sarah immediately sensed that something was wrong. Her heart began to race, and the familiar tightness in her chest returned with full force. "Please, have a seat," Sarah said, gesturing to the chair in front of her. "Order something. The coffee here is really good." David sat down slowly, still wearing a confused expression. He ordered an espresso from the waitress and fell silent for a few moments, clearly trying to process the situation. Sarah, sensing the growing tension and feeling her own insecurities rise, decided to break the silence with the question that had been on her mind all week, but now carried much greater weight. "David, can I ask you something?" Her voice came out softer than she intended, but firm. He nodded, still unable to completely mask the confusion on his face. Sarah took a deep breath, looked directly into his eyes, and asked the question that would change both their lives. "Do you think I still deserve to be happy?" The raw sincerity of the question, coming from someone who was clearly struggling with her own insecurities, yet had found the courage to be there, completely disarmed David's defenses. For the first time since he had entered the cafe, he truly looked at Sarah, not as someone different from what he expected, but as a real person, with fears, hopes, and a vulnerability that echoed his own feelings. David Mendez remained silent for long seconds, the espresso cooling in front of him as he processed the question Sarah had posed. At 35, he thought he had heard it all. As an accountant, he was used to dealing with people's financial anxieties, their fears about the future, their confessions about past mistakes. But no one had ever asked him something so direct, so essential, so human. David began, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture that his daughter Emily knew well. "That's a very deep question for a first date." Sarah lowered her eyes for a moment, stirring the spoon in the now cold coffee with milk. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked that. It's just that, well, when you have a condition like mine, That question lives in your head. It was then that David truly understood the situation. The muffled laughter of co-workers during the week, the indirect comments about surprises and life lessons, the strange insistence from Mark and Tom for him to open up to different experiences, everything fell into place like pieces of a cruel puzzle. "My colleagues," he murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. "They did this on purpose." Sarah quickly raised her eyes, an expression of understanding and pain crossing her face. "Oh, so you didn't know?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. "They tricked you too." "They tricked you too?" David repeated, furrowing his brows. "What do you mean?" "The profile I saw online said you were an interesting single man looking to meet someone special, open-minded, who valued personality over appearance," Sarah explained, her voice taking on a slightly bitter tone. "Clearly you didn't write that." David felt a wave of anger rising in his chest, not against Sarah, but against the men he had considered friends. Mark Smith, the auditing supervisor, always making jokes about David's straight-laced life. Tom Brown, a department colleague, constantly suggesting he have more fun and stop being so serious. They both knew exactly what they were doing when they created that situation. "No, that wasn't me," David admitted, looking directly at Sarah. "And I'm sorry they did that to you. To me too, but mainly to you." Sarah gave a sad smile. It's not the first time someone thought it would be funny to pull a prank on the girl with Down syndrome. But usually it's in person at the bakery or on the street. Online was a new one. "How did you find out it was a prank?" David asked, genuinely curious about how she had come to that conclusion so quickly. "Your face when you saw me," Sarah replied with brutal honesty, "and the way you looked around as if you were searching for someone else. My grandma always says I'm good at reading people. It's one of the perks of being underestimated all the time. You learn to pay attention to the details that others think you won't notice." David felt embarrassed by his own transparency, but also impressed by Sarah's keen perception. In his work, he had developed a similar skill for reading between the lines, sensing when clients omitted important information or when colleagues tried to push responsibilities onto others. "Your grandma sounds like a wise woman," he commented. "She's the smartest person I know," Sarah said, and for the first time since they sat down, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "She raised me by herself since I was a baby. She always said I could be anything I wanted, as long as I worked hard for it." "And what do you want to be?" David asked, realizing that his curiosity was genuine, no longer motivated by the awkwardness of the situation. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I want to have my own bakery one day. Not a big chain, nothing like that. But a place where people feel at home, you know, where they can come for coffee in the morning before work, and I remember each of their orders. Where kids can come buy bread for their mom after school and get a cookie as a bonus." There was a genuine passion in her voice that David recognized. It was the same passion he felt when talking about organizing finances for small businesses, about helping entrepreneurs realize their dreams through proper planning. "That's a beautiful dream," he said. And for the first time, he wasn't just being polite. "You already work at a bakery, don't you?" "I do, at Mr. James Bakery here in Brooklyn. He's Portuguese, came to the US in the 70s, and kind of adopted me when I started working there. I learned everything from him, from making bread to dealing with suppliers, managing inventory, calculating profits." Sarah abruptly stopped. "Sorry, I talk too much when I get nervous." "No, don't stop," encouraged David. "It's interesting. You really understand the business." "I do, but no one takes me seriously when I talk about having my own place." "Sarah, you're very special, but businesses are complicated." "Sarah, you already have a good job. You don't need to dream so big." Even my grandma sometimes thinks I should be content with what I have." David nodded slowly. He recognized that frustration, the feeling of having capabilities that others underestimated, dreams that others considered unrealistic. In the office where he worked, many colleagues saw him only as the by-the-book accountant, with no ambitions beyond checking numbers and filling out reports. "And you?" Sarah asked, turning the conversation. "What do you really want to do?" The question caught him off guard. It had been years since anyone asked about his personal dreams, only about quarterly reports, cost analyses, and budget projections. David paused, realizing he had shared this information with very few people. "I want to open my own accounting firm, specializing in small businesses, helping people like you who have real dreams but need guidance to make them financially viable. Why don't you do it?" "Fear, mainly. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Emily. I need stability to take care of her, and after my ex-wife left us 2 years ago, I'm afraid to take too many risks." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Does your daughter live with you?" "She does. It's just the two of us now." David smiled for the first time since he entered the cafe, and Sarah noticed how his face transformed completely when he talked about his daughter. "She's amazing, smart, curious, brave. Sometimes I think she's more mature than I am." "Does she know you were coming to meet me today?" David blushed slightly. "She does. In fact, it was her who encouraged me. She said I should make new friends because I spend too much time just working and taking care of her." "Kids are wise like that," Sarah commented. "At the bakery, they are always my favorite customers. They don't look at me weird. They don't ask embarrassing questions. They just want to know if there are chocolate truffles today, or if the cinnamon rolls are warm." David laughed, a genuine laugh, not forced. "Emily would love to meet you. She adores chocolate truffles." As soon as he said that, David realized what he had just suggested and felt slightly embarrassed. But Sarah smiled widely. "I would love to meet her too, and I can teach her how to make chocolate truffles from scratch if she wants." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable like before. It was contemplative. They were both processing how a cruel prank had turned into a genuine conversation about dreams, fears, and possibilities. "Sarah," David finally said, "can I answer your question now?" She nodded, waiting. "Yes, you deserve to be happy, completely happy, and anyone who can't see that has a vision problem, not you." Sarah felt her eyes welling up with tears, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that from someone other than my grandma." "And Sarah." "Yes?" "I think my ex-colleagues just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because if the goal was to humiliate me, they achieved the opposite. They gave me the chance to meet someone genuinely interesting." 3 weeks had passed since the meeting at Culture Cafe, and David still couldn't believe how his life had changed. Every Sunday, promptly, at 2 in the afternoon, Sarah would show up at his home in Upper West Side with a bag of fresh bread from Mr. James's bakery and a smile that lit up the 2-bedroom apartment he shared with Emily. "Dad, Sarah is here!" Emily shouted from her room, where she was struggling with her math homework. The 8-year-old had developed an immediate affection for Sarah, especially after discovering that she could explain fractions in a way that finally made sense. David opened the door and found Sarah in the hallway, wearing a simple but well-kept navy blue dress, her hair tied up in a bun she had learned to do by watching videos on YouTube. In her hands, she carried the usual bag of bread, and this time a folder with papers. "Hi, David," she greeted him with that smile he had learned to recognize, the smile that appeared when she was particularly excited about something. "I brought warm cinnamon rolls and, well, I need a favor." Come in," said David, ushering her inside. The apartment was small but organized, with simple decor reflecting David's practical personality: a brown sofa, a shelf with technical books and some novels, a dining table that also served as a desk, and dominating the living room wall, drawings by Emily taped up with Scotch tape. Emily came running from the kitchen where she was preparing orange juice, a tradition she had created for Sundays with Sarah. "Sarah, you need to help me with this problem here. I can't understand how to divide by decimals," said Emily, pulling Sarah by the hand toward the table where her notebooks were spread out. "Hold on there, Emily," David interjected, laughing. "Let Sarah at least sit down and have some juice before you attack her with math." Sarah laughed too, sitting at the table and accepting the glass of orange juice. Emily had prepared orange juice. "It's okay, David. I like helping, and Emily is a very smart student." "Is it true that you can do big calculations in your head?" asked Emily, sitting next to Sarah with her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I can. Want to see?" Sarah grabbed a napkin and wrote down a problem. 127 x 23. "What does it equal?" Emily took the pencil and began solving it on paper, while Sarah closed her eyes for a few seconds. 221, said Sarah. Emily finished the calculation and looked at the result, wide-eyed. "Wow, how do you do that?" "It's a trick my grandma taught me. Actually, it's not as hard as it seems. Do you want me to teach you?" As Sarah explained to Emily the tricks she had learned over the years, number decomposition, multiplication tricks, quick estimates, David watched their interaction with a mix of admiration and tenderness. Emily, who usually got impatient with school explanations, was completely absorbed, asking smart questions and testing the methods Sarah taught. "Dad, why don't teachers explain it like this?" Emily asked at one point. "Everyone has their own way of teaching and learning," David replied diplomatically. But inside he thought the same thing. Sarah had a natural gift for simplifying complex concepts, turning math into something almost fun. After Emily mastered the basic tricks and ran back to her room to test her new knowledge with other exercises, Sarah turned to David with a more serious expression. "David, remember I told you I wanted to have my own bakery?" "I remember, of course." Sarah opened the folder she had brought, revealing pages and pages of handwritten notes with neat handwriting that David recognized as the result of much practice and determination. "I did some research. I wrote down everything about the costs of opening a small bakery, the suppliers Mr. James uses, how much each piece of equipment costs, what the average foot traffic is in our area." Sarah spoke quickly, excited, flipping through the pages and showing simple but well-organized graphs. "But I don't understand anything about official documents, taxes, that sort of thing. Could you help me?" David took the sheets and began examining Sarah's work, feeling a growing surprise. The research was thorough, well-structured, and demonstrated a real understanding of the business. She had calculated raw material costs, profit margins per product, even estimated the foot traffic needed to cover fixed expenses. "Sarah, this is impressive," he said, genuinely amazed. "Where did you learn to organize information like this?" Sarah blushed slightly. "Watching Mr. James over the years, asking suppliers, researching on the bakery's internet when there's no foot traffic. And Ms. Smith, who owns the clothing store next door, taught me some things about inventory control." "Do you have an idea of where you'd like to open?" "I have a few options," Sarah replied, turning to a specific page. "There's a small commercial space on my street that has been for rent for months. The owner is a friend of my grandma's, and he said he would give a good price to someone from the community." David continued examining the papers, making mental notes. Sarah's numbers were correct, but there were several bureaucratic issues she hadn't considered: health licenses, operating permits, labor issues, tax planning. "Sarah, your planning is very good, but you'll need help with the legal and accounting side, and you'll also need initial capital." By your calculations, at least. $50,000 to start. Sarah's face fell slightly. That's a lot of money, isn't it? It's a considerable investment, David agreed, but quickly added, but it's not impossible. There are financing options for micro-entrepreneurs, support programs for small businesses. The key is to structure everything correctly. Would you help me with that? I can pay, of course. Not much, but... Sarah, David interrupted, would you help me understand one thing first? She nodded, intrigued. Why is it so important for you to have your own bakery? You already have a stable job. You're respected where you work. Sarah was silent for a few moments, looking out the window of the living room, where the typical Sunday bustle of the Upper West Side could be seen. Families walking, children playing in the park, neighbors chatting on the sidewalks. "Do you remember when you asked me about deserving to be happy?" she finally said. David nodded. "The thing is, my whole life, people decide for me. They decide what job I can do, what dreams are realistic for someone like me, what responsibilities I can take on. Even people who love me, like my grandma, sometimes do this without realizing." Sarah turned to David, and he saw a fierce determination in her eyes. "I want to prove, to myself mainly, that I can build something, that I can be responsible not only for myself, but for a business, for employees, for customers who trust me. I want when people go to my bakery, they don't think how nice the girl with Down syndrome made it. I want them to think, what delicious bread, what great service, I'll come back tomorrow." David felt a tightness in his chest, not discomfort but recognition. It was exactly how he felt. In the office, being underestimated, having his ideas ignored, being seen only as someone who completes tasks. "I understand," he said, and Sarah realized he truly understood. "And I will help you, not as a favor, but as a business partner, if you're up for it, of course." "What do you mean?" "You need accounting and legal consulting. I need to start building my own client base. How about Sarah's Bakery being my first project as an independent consultant?" Sarah's eyes widened. "But what about your job? I'll still keep it for now, but I can start taking on some clients in my spare time and on weekends, and Emily can be our research assistant," David said, smiling. "I would love to help calculate how many chocolate truffles you guys are going to sell per day." "Emily!" shouted Sarah, unable to contain her excitement. "Come here, I need to tell you something." Emily came running, and when Sarah explained the plan, the girl clapped her hands in joy. "Can I really help? I can make graphs on my dad's computer." "Of course you can," confirmed David. "It will be a family project." Sarah looked at the two of them, the smiling father and daughter, excited about the possibility of embarking on an adventure with her, and felt something she couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude, more than friendship. It was the feeling of belonging to something bigger than herself. "So," said David, extending his hand to Sarah, "partners." Sarah shook his hand, smiling. "Partners." Outside, the first drops of a summer rain began to fall, but inside the Upper West Side apartment, 3 individual dreams were transforming into a common project that would change all their lives. The accounting firm Johnson & Associates occupied the 12th floor of a commercial building in the Wall Street area, with its gray walls, standardized desks, and the eternal smell of reheated coffee that permeated all corporate environments in New York. David arrived the following Monday with a different energy, carrying a folder with Sarah's bakery plans and a determination he hadn't felt in years. "Look who's all excited today," commented Mark Smith, lifting his eyes from the computer screen as David passed by his desk. At 42, Mark had been an audit supervisor for a decade, a broad-shouldered man with a pronounced belly who compensated for his lack of creativity at work with sarcastic comments about other people's lives. "Good morning, Mark," replied David, maintaining the neutral tone he had perfected over years of forced coexistence. Tom Brown, sitting at the next desk, seized the opportunity. "So, Dave, how was the date from last century? Was the special princess up to expectations?" The mocking tone was poorly disguised by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. David stopped midway to his desk, feeling the familiar knot in his stomach that always accompanied confrontations with colleagues. For 3 years, he had developed strategies to avoid these situations, arriving earlier, leaving later, having lunch at different times. But today, something was different. "Actually," said David, turning to face the two men, "it was the best date I've ever had. Sarah is an extraordinary person." Tom's mocking smile faltered slightly. "Seriously, you're not just being polite?" "I'm being honest," David replied, feeling a courage he didn't know where it came from. "She's smart, hard-working, has concrete dreams, and knows more about small business management than both of you combined." Mark let out a loud laugh that drew the attention of other employees. "Oh, come on, David. You don't have to pretend. It was nice just to spare our feelings. We know it was a prank." "It was a prank, yes," David agreed, surprising both of them, "but not against me, against her. And frankly, I'm ashamed to have colleagues capable of such cruelty." The atmosphere around them fell silent. Other employees stopped typing, whispered conversations ceased. It was rare to see David Johnson, the quiet and polite accountant, confronting someone so openly. Tom stood up from his chair, his flushed face revealing irritation. "Look, we did that to help you. You live locked up in that apartment with your daughter. You don't go out, you don't have fun. We thought you needed a wake-up call." "A wake-up call?" David's voice came out louder than he intended. "You created a fake profile to deceive a vulnerable woman and put me in an embarrassing situation. That's not help. It's pure malice." Mark joined Tom, crossing his arms over his chest. "Vulnerable? David, for God's sake, you're exaggerating. It was just a joke." "A joke for whom?" David shot back. "For Sarah, who showed up expecting to meet someone genuinely interested in her? For me, who could have left thinking you were right to consider me an idiot? Or for you, who had fun imagining our humiliation?" The department manager, Ms. Johnson, appeared drawn by the commotion. A 50-year-old woman, her hair always pulled back in a tight bun, and wearing suits that looked like corporate armor. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking from David to Mark and Tom. "Nothing much, Ms. Johnson," Mark quickly said. "Just a heated discussion about football." David looked at Ms. Johnson, then at his colleagues, and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Actually, Ms. Johnson, it's not about football. Mark and Tom created a fake online profile to prank me, making me meet a woman they deemed unsuitable for me due to her situation. I think that constitutes workplace harassment." Ms. Johnson's face immediately hardened. As a manager, she had undergone training on harassment and knew exactly the legal implications of what David was reporting. "My office, the three of you, now," she ordered. 20 minutes later, David left Ms. Johnson's office with Mark and Tom receiving a formal written warning and the promise that any similar situation would result in termination. But the administrative victory did not bring relief. It brought consequences. For the rest of the week, David was subjected to subtle but effective isolation. Conversations ceased when he approached, invitations for group lunches disappeared, and his reports began to be questioned with an excessive scrutiny that was clearly not coincidental. "Dad, are you okay?" Emily asked on Wednesday night when she found him at the dinner table reviewing a report for the third time, one that normally took 15 minutes to finish. David looked up from the papers and saw his daughter in the kitchen doorway, wearing the unicorn pajamas that Sarah had praised the previous Sunday. He had dark hair just like his, but he had inherited from his mother the ability to sense emotional tensions that adults tried to hide. "I'm fine, Princess. Just some problems at work." Emily approached and climbed onto her father's lap, something she did less and less as she grew, but still offered when she sensed he needed it. "Is it because of Sarah?" she asked with the typical frankness of children. David sighed. "How do you know that?" "Because you changed after you met her, happier. Then suddenly this week you got worried again, just like before she showed up." His daughter's insight always surprised David. "It's a bit complicated to explain, Emily. There are people at my work who didn't like how I defended Sarah." "But why wouldn't anyone like Sarah? She's nice." "She's very nice," David agreed. "But there are people who have prejudices against different people." Emily was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you remember when the teacher talked about bullying at school?" "I remember." "Is that what they're doing to you at work?" David looked at his daughter, once again impressed by her ability to simplify complex situations. "It's kind of similar." "Yes." "And do you remember what the teacher said we should do when we see bullying?" "I don't remember." "What did she say?" "That we can't stay quiet. That we have to tell an adult or do something to stop it." David hugged his daughter tighter. "You're right, Princess. Sometimes adults forget the important things that children know." That night, after putting Emily to bed, David called Sarah. She was at home, helping Ms. Grace organize medications for the week when the phone rang. "Hi, David. How was your week?" "Complicated," he admitted. "I had some problems at work because of our date." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because of me?" "No, Sarah. Because of other people's prejudices. You aren't to blame for anything. Do you want to talk about it? I can come over or you can come here. My grandma would love to meet you." David considered the offer. The idea of leaving the house, of not dwelling on office problems, was tempting. "You know what? Emily and I can come over, if it won't bother your grandma." "Bother? She'll be thrilled. She's been curious about you for weeks." An hour later, David and Emily rang the doorbell of Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn. Ms. Grace opened the door, a petite woman with grey hair tied in a low bun, wearing a simple floral dress and an apron that smelled of cinnamon. "So this is the famous David," she said, with a warm smile that immediately put them both at ease. "And this little doll must be Emily, the one Sarah can't stop praising." The apartment was small but cozy, with well-kept antique furniture, plenty of plants on the balcony, and family photographs scattered across the walls. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of a cake that Miss Grace had prepared especially for the visit. "Sarah told me you two are planning a bakery together," Miss Grace said, serving coffee and generous slices of cornbread cake. "I think it's a wonderful idea." "Your granddaughter is very determined," David commented, "and she has a natural talent for business." "She takes after me," the elderly woman said proudly. "I've always been good with numbers. When I arrived in New York, I worked in a textile factory, and within 6 months, I was already helping the accountant with the spreadsheets." Emily, who had been enchanted by the apartment's decor, asked, "Miss Grace, did you always know that Sarah was special?" The innocent question made all the adults laugh, but Miss Grace answered seriously, "I always knew, my dear. From a young age, she showed that she saw the world in a unique way. And do you know what the secret is?" Emily shook her head, curious. "The secret is that everyone is special in a different way. Sarah is special in her way, you are special in your way, and your dad is special in his way." It was then that David shared about the problems at the office, about the initial prank, about how defending Sarah had created tensions with his colleagues. "David," Ms. Grace said after hearing the whole story, "can I give you advice from someone who has lived through a lot?" He nodded. Sometimes life puts situations in front of us to help us discover what we are made of. You can keep putting up with these people, or you can use this as a push to do what you really want. Sarah, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. David, if you decide to leave the office to start your business, I can be your first official client, with a contract and everything. David looked around the room, at Ms. Grace, who radiated wisdom and support, at Sarah, who offered not just friendship but professional partnership, at Emily, who had fallen asleep leaning against his shoulder, finally relaxed after a tense week. "You know what?" he finally said. "I think it's time to stop being afraid and start building the life I really want." Autumn arrived in New York with its characteristic subtlety, the trees in Brooklyn turning golden, while the mornings gained a freshness that signaled the colder months ahead. It was March, and Sarah walked through the neighborhood streets with renewed energy, observing every corner with the eyes of a future entrepreneur. In her hands, she carried a folder with documents that David had prepared, the first official step to bring the bakery dream to life. "Mr. James," Sarah called, entering Bakery St. Benedict, as she had done every morning for 3 years. The familiar smell of fresh bread and strong coffee welcomed her like a hug. But today there was something different in the air, a tension she couldn't identify. Mr. Johnson, a 68-year-old Portuguese man who had arrived in New York in the 70s with just a suitcase and a lot of determination, was behind the counter with a worried expression that contrasted with his usually jovial demeanor. His grey hair was messier than usual, and he nervously fiddled with the white apron he had worn for decades. "Good morning, dear," he replied, but the forced smile didn't fool Sarah. "How is the family?" "Everyone is well, Mr. James. Ms. Grace sent her regards and said she would stop by later to buy those cheese puffs she loves." Sarah tied her apron and began arranging the pastries in the display case, a routine she knew by heart. "Are you all right? You seem worried." Mr. James sighed deeply, taking off his glasses to clean them, a nervous tic that Sarah had learned to recognize over the years. "Sarah, we need to talk. Sit here for a minute." Sarah's heart raced. In 3 years of working, Mr. James had never asked her to sit down for a chat. He was always direct and practical, treating her like any competent employee. "Is something wrong?" she asked, sitting on one of the plastic chairs behind the counter. "It's about the bakery, dear. Things haven't been easy." Mr. James sat next to her, his calloused hands from decades of work trembling slightly. "You know that big supermarket that opened at the corner up the street?" Sarah nodded. The supermarket chain had opened 2 months ago, featuring a modern bakery section, competitive prices, and its own parking lot. "We've lost almost 30% of our customers since they opened. People prefer to do all their shopping in one place. It's more convenient." Mr. James's voice carried a deep sadness. "And it's not just that. The rent here went up 40%. In the last adjustment, suppliers raised their prices, and I'm no longer young enough to chase after new trends." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. The Bakery St. Benedict was not just her workplace, it was her second home, the place where she had learned everything about the business, where she felt valued and respected. "Mr. James, are you thinking of closing the bakery?" The silence that followed was the answer Sarah feared to hear. "I don't want to, dear. This bakery is my whole life in America, but I can't keep losing money every month. I'm already using my retirement savings to keep the business running." Sarah remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. Her mind raced, connecting the current situation with all the plans she had made with David. "Mr. James, can I ask a somewhat crazy question?" He raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "Have you ever thought about having a partner? Someone who could invest in modernizing the bakery and help bring customers back?" Mr. James laughed bitterly. "Sarah, who would want to invest in a small bakery in a changing neighborhood. Young people want modern businesses, apps, delivery. What if I told you I know? Someone who understands how to modernize small businesses without losing their traditional soul. Mr. James's expression changed slightly. Are you serious? Very serious. Remember I told you about David, that accountant I met? I remember. The father of the girl you teach math. He's starting a consulting firm for small businesses, and I was planning to open my own bakery, but maybe we can think of something different. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and Ms. Smith walked in, as she did every morning before opening her clothing store next door. A 70-year-old lady, always well-dressed, with dyed blonde hair and an energy that belied her age. "Good morning, Mr. James. Good morning, Sarah," she greeted, but soon noticed the heavy atmosphere. "Is something wrong?" Sarah looked at Mr. James, who gestured for her to go ahead. Ms. Smith was more than a neighbor. She was part of the community that had formed around the bakery over the years. "Ms. Smith, the bakery is struggling because of the competition from the new supermarket," Sarah explained. "Oh my God!" exclaimed Ms. Smith, sitting down in a third chair. "I had my suspicions. There have been many fewer customers lately." "It's true," confirmed Mr. James. "And it's not just here. Ms. Johnson, who had the grocery store on the corner, closed last month. Mr. Brown from the newsstand is thinking of retiring for good. The neighborhood is changing, and I don't know if it's for the better." Sarah felt a determination growing inside her. What if we didn't let the neighborhood change without a fight? What if, instead of competing with the big supermarket, we offered something they could never provide? "What kind of thing?" asked Miss Smith, intrigued. "Comfort, history, personal relationships, artisan products." Sarah stood up and began to walk around the small bakery, gesturing as she spoke. "Mr. James, you have recipes that no supermarket in the world can replicate. Miss Smith, you know the story of every family in the neighborhood. I know the preferences of every regular customer." "Where are you going with this, dear?" Mr. James asked. "I want to reach a partnership. You bring the bakery and all your experience. I bring energy and new ideas, and David brings knowledge to modernize without losing character." Sarah stopped in front of both of them, her eyes shining. "We transform this place into the heart of the community again." Miss Smith clapped her hands. "Sarah, what a beautiful idea. Mr. James, just imagine, we could host events here, cooking workshops, senior citizen gatherings." "And math classes for kids," added Sarah excitedly, "and study groups for teenagers, and local artisans' exhibitions." Mr. James looked at the two women with an expression that shifted between hope and skepticism. "Ladies, you have beautiful ideas, but business needs money, organization, planning." "That's why we have David," said Sarah. "He can help structure all of this. Financially viable." "And Sarah," Miss Smith said, "your friend can't just help with consulting. If she's going to be a partner, she has to invest too." Sarah swallowed hard. I have some savings, and I was planning to ask for a loan to open my bakery." "How much do you have saved?" Mr. James asked, automatically taking on the role of experienced negotiator. $15,000 in savings, and with my credit clean, I can get a loan of up to $20,000 from the bank." Mr. James did the math in his head. $35,000 would be enough to modernize the oven, buy new equipment, and do some basic renovations. "And I can talk to other merchants on the street," Miss Smith offered. "If the idea is good, maybe we can get more support from the community." Around 10 in the morning, when the bakery's traffic usually slowed down, Sarah called David from the landline at the shop. "David, it's me, Sarah. Can you come to the bakery now? There's a situation that could change all our plans." An hour later, David arrived with Emily, who was on her school break. Mr. James had temporarily closed the bakery, putting up a sign on the door. Back in an hour. Important meeting for the future of St. Benedict Bakery. So, David said after hearing the whole explanation, you're proposing that instead of Sarah opening a new bakery, she becomes a partner in this existing bakery? Exactly, Mr. James confirmed. I'll keep 51%, ensuring that the traditions are maintained. Sarah will have 34%, proportional to her investment. And you, David, if you want, can take 15% in exchange for consulting and modernization services. Emily, who had been quietly exploring the bakery until then, raised her hand as if she were in school. Can I give an opinion? Everyone laughed and nodded. I think you should do that. But there's one thing you haven't thought about. What is it, Princess? David asked. You're thinking about competing with the supermarket, but actually, you could be partners with it. The adults exchanged intrigued glances. What do you mean, Emily? Sarah asked. Simple. The supermarket sells basic things, for everyone the same. You can sell special, personalized things. For example, a mother goes to the supermarket to buy basic ingredients, but comes here to order her son's birthday cake with the theme he likes. The silence that followed was one of admiration. An 8-year-old had identified a market niche that all the adults had overlooked. Emily, Mr. James said, impressed, you have a head for business? I take after my dad, she replied proudly. It was Ms. Smith who broke the moment. So, is it decided? Are we going to save our bakery? Sarah looked around, at Mr. James, who had been like a professional father to her, at Miss Smith, who represented the community she wanted to serve, at David and Emily, who had become her chosen family, at the walls of the bakery that knew every inch. Let's save our bakery, she said, extending her hand to the center of the group. One by one, everyone placed their hands over hers. St. Benedict Society, Tradition and Innovation, Mr. James declared solemnly. I like it, Sarah approved. Me too, David agreed. And can I be the manager of special projects? Emily asked. Sure, they all replied in chorus, laughing. Outside, the leaves continued to fall, but inside St. Benedict Bakery, something new was being born. The December heat in New York was relentless, turning the asphalt streets into furnaces and making the air shimmer over the hoods of parked cars. Inside St. Benedict Bakery, now under renovation, the thermometer read 40 degrees, even with the doors open, and 3 fans running at full blast. Sarah was kneeling on the floor, painting the wooden shelves that Mr. James had sanded that morning, when she heard raised voices on the sidewalk. I can't believe you're really doing this, David, said a male voice she immediately recognized as Mark, David's former co-worker, leaving a stable job to become a partner in a bakery with her. Sarah stopped painting, the brush suspended in the air. David had quit the previous week, officially leaving the accounting firm after months of rising tension. The decision had caused an uproar in the office, especially among Mark and Tom. Mark, Emily is here, David replied, his voice restrained but firm. And Sarah can hear you too. Great, that way she hears the voice of reason, Tom interjected. David, man, you have a daughter to raise. You can't throw your career away because of a misguided romantic impulse. Emily, who was sitting in a folding chair organizing papers for her dad, looked up with a confused expression. Dad, who are these men? They're former co-workers, Princess, David explained, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. And they were just leaving. Sarah slowly stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. Through the open door, she could see the 3 men on the sidewalk. David, in a simple t-shirt and shorts, clearly more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Mark in a suit, even in the heat, sweating profusely. And Tom in a polo shirt with a superior expression that irritated Sarah deeply. Actually, Sarah said, walking to the door, I think they can come in. It's too hot to stay in the sun. David looked at her in surprise, but Sarah discreetly signaled that she knew what she was doing. No, thanks, Mark quickly replied. We just came to try to make David see how big of a mistake he's making. What mistake? Sarah asked, maintaining a genuinely curious tone. Can you explain? Tom stepped forward, clearly thinking he had found an opportunity to be direct. Look, Sarah, nothing against you personally, but David had a promising future at a serious company. Now he's risking everything on a bakery, Sarah calmly completed, with a woman who... Down syndrome. The embarrassment of the two men was palpable. Mark loosened his tie, and Tom looked around as if searching for an escape route. That's not it, Mark murmured. It is exactly that, replied Sarah, but without aggression. You think someone like me can't be a competent business partner? Mr. James appeared from the back of the bakery, carrying a tray with glasses of cold water and a serious expression. At 68, he had learned to read people quickly and did not like what he saw. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I am Mr. James, owner of this bakery for 45 years. Good afternoon, replied Mark, and Tom, clearly uncomfortable with the elderly man's respectful formality. I heard you talking about a promising future and serious businesses, Mr. James continued, offering water to the visitors with the natural courtesy of someone who had spent decades serving customers. May I ask what field you work in? Corporate accounting, Mark replied, gratefully accepting the glass. Tax auditing, said Tom. Ah, very interesting. Mr. James nodded respectfully. So you must understand numbers, cash flow, investment analysis. Of course, Mark confirmed, puffing out his chest slightly. Great. So can you explain to me how a company that laid off 4 employees in the last 6 months for cost reduction offers more financial security than a growing business of your own? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of fans and traffic outside. What? Tom asked. The company where David worked, Sarah explained, picking up a folder from the table. We did some basic research before he made the decision. 4 layoffs in 6 months, profits declining for 2 years, and according to public information, they are considering outsourcing the accounting department. David looked at Sarah with admiration. She had done an investigation he hadn't even thought of conducting. That doesn't matter, Mark said, but his voice had lost conviction. It does, Emily countered, surprising everyone. The girl stood up and walked over to stand next to Sarah. You are saying my dad made a dumb choice, but you don't even know what you're talking about. Emily, David began, but she continued, my dad was unhappy at work for a long time. You made him feel bad. He came home tired and sad. Now he wakes up excited every day. Sarah bent down to be at Emily's height. And you know what else, Emily? Your dad is the best financial consultant I've ever met. He took my business plan and improved it so much that even the bank manager was impressed. What bank? Mark asked, clearly skeptical. Chase Bank, Brooklyn branch, David replied. We secured funding for small entrepreneurs with interest rates below the market average. And that's not all, Mr. James added. David modernized our inventory management, created a financial control system that reduced our costs by 20%, and developed a marketing plan that has already increased our clientele. Tom laughed dismissively. Marketing for a bakery. What's next, a TV commercial? Social media, actually, Emily said proudly. I helped create the bakery's Instagram. We already have 200 followers and 3 special orders just this week. Sarah went to the counter and grabbed her phone, showing the screen to the visitors. Look here, post about our artisanal bread, 60 likes. Story about Mr. James and his journey from Portugal, 80 likes and 15 shares. Video of Emily explaining math with chocolate truffles, 120 likes. People love authentic content, David explained. It's not cold corporate marketing, it's genuine storytelling. Mark and Tom examined the phone in silence, clearly surprised by the quality and engagement of the posts. "All right, you have some interesting numbers," Mark admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't change the fact that starting your own business is always a bigger risk than traditional employment." "For whom?" Sarah asked. "For someone with innovative ideas who is willing to work hard, or for someone who just wants to clock in and get paid at the end of the month?" The question hit home. Both visitors knew they fit into the second category. "Sarah," Tom said, trying one last card, "no offense, but do you really think you have enough experience to run a business? Managing employees, dealing with suppliers, solving complex problems?" Sarah looked at him for a few seconds before answering. "Tom, can I ask you a few questions?" He nodded, suspicious. "How long have you worked in accounting?" 12 years. "And have you ever had to explain math to a 6-year-old who has learning difficulties?" "No, but..." "Have you ever had to calm down an angry client who lost an important document on the due date?" "That's different." "Have you ever had to resolve a raw material supply crisis on a Saturday morning because the truck broke down on the road?" Tom remained silent. "Have you ever had to manage the finances of an entire family on a minimum wage, ensuring there was enough left for grandma's medicine, school supplies, and still a little for emergencies?" Sarah paused, looking directly into his eyes. "I do that every day for 3 years, and I still find time to study business management at night and help others with their difficulties. So yes, Tom, I think I have enough experience." The silence that followed was broken by Mr. James slowly clapping his hands. "Well said, girl." David smiled proudly. "That's why she's my partner." Emily approached Sarah and held her hand. "And my best friend." Mark looked at his watch. "Well, we have to go. We wanted you to know you can come back if you change your mind, David." "Thank you for your concern," David replied. "But I'm exactly where I want to be." When the two men left, the group remained silent for a few moments, processing what had happened. "Sarah," David finally said, "you were amazing. How? Did you hear all that information about the company?" Sarah smiled. "Miss Johnson has a friend who works in HR there, and the internet has a lot more public information about companies than people realize." "Did you see how they reacted when we showed the actual results?" said Emily, excited. "They sure did," agreed Mr. James. "Prejudice only lasts until someone sees the numbers." "Not always," said Sarah more seriously. "Some people don't want to see, even with the evidence right in front of them." "True," agreed David. "But the good news is that we don't need their approval to be successful." Sarah looked around the bakery under renovation, the walls half-painted, the new equipment still wrapped, the plants that Ms. Johnson had donated to decorate the space. It was hot, messy, and there was a lot of work ahead, but it was also full of possibilities. "You know what?" she said. "I think they did us a favor today." "What do you mean?" asked Emily. "They reminded me why we're doing this. It's not just to have our own business. It's to prove that different people can build extraordinary things when they work together." David nodded. "And to teach Emily that a person's worth isn't measured by their circumstances, but by the character they choose to have. And by the chocolate truffle she makes," added Emily, making everyone laugh. Outside, the December sun continued to beat down relentlessly. But inside St. Benedict, the warmth was different. It was the warmth of shared labor, determination, and the certainty that they were building something much bigger than just a simple business. The Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully on Silvertella Street, creating colorful reflections in the newly opened bakery's windows. It was Christmas Eve, and Sarah couldn't stop smiling as she watched the hustle and bustle on the street through the glass door they had installed during the renovation. The contrast with the same time last year was striking, where there had once been just a traditional bakery struggling against competition. Now there was a true community hub. "Sarah, we need more chocolate truffles in the display," shouted Carla, the 16-year-old they had hired part-time. She was Ms. Johnson's daughter and had proven to be a natural salesperson, especially good at dealing with younger customers. "I'm on it," Sarah replied, pulling the third batch of chocolate truffles from the oven. The special recipe she had developed, with Belgian chocolate and a hint of coffee, had become the flagship item of the revamped bakery, generating a line that sometimes stretched down the sidewalk. David appeared from the back of the establishment, carrying a box of printed forms and wearing a satisfied expression that Sarah had learned to recognize. It was his mission-accomplished face. "I just closed the contract with the local public school," he announced, placing the box on the counter. "We're going to provide special snacks for children with dietary restrictions. $500 a week guaranteed." "David, that's wonderful," exclaimed Sarah, quickly hugging him before returning to the chocolate truffles. In recent months, these spontaneous gestures of affection had become natural between them, evolving from friendship into something neither had labeled yet, but both felt growing. Emily rushed through the door, her cheeks red from the cold, and carrying a school backpack that seemed heavier than she was. "Dad, Sarah, guess what happened at school today?" "What is it, Princess?" David asked, crouching down to be at her level. "The principal called our class for a special meeting and said our bakery was chosen as an example of a socially responsible business for next year's social studies project." Sarah almost dropped the tray of chocolate truffles. "What do you mean?" "She said you created jobs for people in the community, that you partner with schools, that you help low-income families with special discounts. A bunch of things I didn't even know were important." Emily spoke quickly, excited. "And there's going to be an official visit in January with students from other schools." Mr. James emerged from the kitchen, where he was preparing the holiday cakes that had become a Christmas tradition of the revamped bakery. At 68, he seemed to have rejuvenated 10 years since the start of the partnership. "What's all this commotion?" he asked, taking off his chef's hat. "The school chose our bakery as a model of a responsible business," David explained, still processing the news. "Oh, that doesn't surprise me," said Mr. James casually. "Yesterday, Emily's teacher came here to buy bread and chatted with me about how we've changed the neighborhood's dynamics." "What do you mean?" asked Sarah, curious. "She said that before the supermarket opened, people complained that the neighborhood was becoming impersonal, that no one knew each other anymore. Now, with our community events and Emily's activities, the neighborhood is coming together again." It was true. In recent months, the bakery had become much more than just a place to sell bread. On Wednesday afternoons, Sarah offered basic math classes for adults in the literacy process. On Saturdays, Emily coordinated a study group for elementary school children, and on Sundays, Mr. James told stories of his immigration while teaching traditional Portuguese recipes. "Speaking of community," David said, "has Ms. Grace arrived?" "She has. She's back there preparing the special French toast," Sarah replied. Her grandmother had become a sort of unofficial culinary consultant for the bakery, bringing northeastern recipes that were popular among the growing migrant population in the neighborhood. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and a man walked in whom Sarah recognized immediately, although she had never spoken to him. It was Dr. Albert Smith, a renowned pediatrician who lived in the most expensive building in the area. Tall, with well-groomed grey hair, expensive clothes, but with a hesitant expression that contrasted with his imposing appearance. "Good afternoon," he said, looking around with evident curiosity. I would like to place a special order." "Of course," Sarah responded promptly. "What kind of order?" "It's for New Year's Eve. I'm throwing a party at home and would like to serve unique sweets. I've heard great things about your chocolate truffles." Sarah approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "How many people?" "About 20 adults. I'd like a variety: chocolate truffles, coconut truffles, maybe some vegan options too." "We do have vegan options," confirmed Sarah. "I've developed some recipes using coconut milk and vegan chocolate. They turned out delicious." Dr. Albert seemed surprised. "You developed the recipes?" "Yes, I did. I'm one of the partners at the bakery," Sarah explained casually. The doctor looked from Sarah to David, then to Mr. James, clearly trying to process the information. "I see. And do you have any quality certification, something that guarantees food safety?" The question was legitimate, but the tone carried a veiled suspicion that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "We do," replied David, pulling out a folder. "Sanitation certification renewed 2 months ago, food handling course for the entire staff, and specific liability insurance for food establishments." Dr. Albert examined the documents, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to impression. "This is very professional. I didn't expect such rigor from a neighborhood bakery." "Dr. Albert," Mr. James said diplomatically, "may I ask what you've heard about our sweets?" "Actually, it was my housekeeper. She buys here and can't stop praising them. She said she's never had chocolate truffles this good, that the girl who makes them is very talented." "The girl who makes them is me," said Sarah, smiling. "And I bet your housekeeper is Ms. Francis, who lives on the street behind." Dr. Albert nodded, surprised. "You know her?" "I know the whole family. Her son, Junior, is in Emily's study group on Saturdays. And Ms. Francis always buys our whole grain bread because her husband is diabetic." The doctor's expression changed completely. You really know the community." "Dr. Albert," intervened Emily, who had been listening to the conversation, "can I ask a question?" "Of course, dear." "Why did you seem surprised when you found out that Sarah is a partner at the bakery?" The innocent question created an awkward silence. Dr. Albert looked at Emily, then at Sarah, clearly struggling with his own prejudices. Well, I didn't expect." "Is it because I have Down syndrome?" Sarah asked gently, without aggression. "Sarah," David began, but she gestured that she was fine. "Dr. Albert, can I tell you something? When I was a child, doctors told my grandmother that I would probably never learn to read properly, never be able to work, never be independent." Sarah stopped arranging the sweets and looked him directly in the eye. "Today I read business management books, develop my own recipes, manage employees, and I'm a partner in a growing business." Dr. Albert remained silent, clearly uncomfortable but also intrigued. "What I mean is," Sarah continued, "is that sometimes people, even very intelligent and educated people like you, make judgments based on appearances, not on real abilities." "Sarah is right," said Miss Grace, appearing from the kitchen with an apron full of flour and a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Doctor. I'm Sarah's grandmother." "Good afternoon, ma'am. Grace Santos. And you must be Dr. Albert, whom Ms. Francis always praises. She says you are a very caring doctor for children." Dr. Albert blushed slightly. "Francis is very kind." "Doctor," said Miss Grace, "may I suggest something? How about trying our sweets before placing an order? That way you can be sure of the quality." "Great idea," agreed Sarah, preparing a plate with chocolate truffles, coconut truffles, and some vegan options. "Feel free to try as much as you like." Dr. Albert tasted each sweet slowly, his expression gradually changing to one of genuine surprise and pleasure. "This is exceptional, truly exceptional." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "Sarah," Dr. Albert said after a few moments, "I owe you an apology. I came here with prejudices that have no basis in reality." "You don't need to apologize," Sarah replied. "It happens to everyone. The important thing is that you are willing to change your opinion when you see the facts. More than that, he said, I would like to place a much larger order than I originally planned, and, well, I have several colleagues who would love to know about this place. David smiled. You will be very welcome, Doctor. When Dr. Albert left half an hour later, he had ordered sweets for 3 different events and promised to recommend the bakery to his acquaintances. Sarah, said Emily, you are amazing. The way you talk to him. Emily is right, David agreed. You turned a skeptical customer into a genuine admirer. Sarah blushed slightly. I learned from you all. With Mr. James's patience, David's diplomacy, and Emily's honesty. And with Miss Grace's wisdom, added Mr. James. Miss Grace appeared, again now carrying a tray of steaming French toast. What are you all talking about? About how you raised an extraordinary granddaughter, David said. The elderly woman smiled proudly. I didn't raise anything special. I just taught her to be who she has always been. That night, when they closed the bakery, the group gathered for a brief year-end review. Sales had increased by 200% compared to the previous year. They had created 4 direct jobs, developed partnerships with 3 schools, and become a reference for community business in the area. You know what makes me most proud? Sarah said, looking out the windows at the Christmas lights decorating the entire street. It's not just the numbers, it's knowing that we've created a place where people feel at home. A place where everyone is welcome, added Emily. A place where differences are celebrated, not just tolerated, said David. Mr. James raised a glass of Portuguese wine he had saved for the occasion. A toast, he said, to unexpected partnerships that become chosen families. They all toasted, and through the windows the Christmas lights continued to twinkle, illuminating not only the street, but also the dreams that had come true through teamwork and the courage to believe in one another. June arrived with its typical New York chill, and the preparation for the summer festival at St. Benedict Bakery was in full swing. It was a Saturday morning, and Sarah arrived earlier than usual, carrying a box of colourful flags she had spent the whole week making at home with Miss Grace. What she didn't expect was to find David already at the shop, sitting at one of the small tables with a grim expression and several papers spread out in front of him. Good morning, she greeted, noticing the silence. Normally, David would arrive humming a tune that Emily had taught him. Is something wrong? David looked up, and Sarah immediately saw that he hadn't slept well. Dark circles were under his eyes, and his shirt, always impeccably pressed, was wrinkled. Good morning, Sarah. Sit here. I need to tell you something. The serious tone made Sarah's heart race. Is it about Emily, Miss Grace? No, it's nothing about health. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had learned to recognize as a sign of extreme nervousness. It's about the bakery, about our partnership. Sarah sat down slowly, still holding the box of flags. What happened? Yesterday afternoon, after you guys left, a man came in claiming to be a process server. He brought a notification about a civil lawsuit against the bakery. Civil lawsuit? What kind of lawsuit? David picked up one of the papers and showed it to Sarah. The document was long and filled with complex legal terms, but the heading was clear. Complaint against business establishment for discriminatory practices and exploitation of person with disability. Sarah read silently, her hands starting to tremble slightly as she understood the nature of the accusation. David, they're saying that you're exploiting me, that our partnership is a sham to hide forced labor. That's exactly what they're alleging. David's voice was heavy with contained indignation. According to the complaint, I would be taking advantage of your vulnerability to obtain unpaid labor, and the partnership would just be a front. Sarah continued reading, each word feeling like a punch to the stomach. The complaint was detailed, mentioning supposed irregularities in the partnership documentation, questioning Sarah's ability to consent to business contracts, and suggesting that the whole operation was a sophisticated form of exploitation. "Who made this complaint?" she asked, looking for a signature at the bottom of the document. "A group called the Disability Rights Advocacy Group. I've never heard of that organization." At that moment the doorbell rang, and Mr. James entered, carrying 2 shopping bags from the grocery store. Upon seeing the expressions of the partners, he stopped immediately. "What's with the long faces? Did someone die?" "Worse," said Sarah, handing him the papers. "We've been accused of exploitation." Mr. James placed the groceries on the counter and adjusted his glasses to read the document. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen," he grumbled. "Exploitation. Sarah works fewer hours than any traditional employee, earns more than I paid her before the partnership, and still has a share in the profits." "The problem isn't the facts," David said bitterly. "The problem is the perception. And according to my lawyer, this kind of complaint can lead to an investigation that could last for months." Sarah remained silent for a few moments, processing the implications. "David, could this affect your accounting license?" "It could, and it could affect our operating license as well." The door opened again, this time revealing Emily, accompanied by Ms. Grace. The girl was excited, talking about the summer festival, but she stopped abruptly upon sensing the heavy atmosphere. "What's going on?" asked Ms. Grace, with the keen intuition of someone who had spent 78 years learning to read between the lines. Sarah looked at her grandmother, then at Emily, and made a decision. "Grandma, sit here. You all need to know something." 10 minutes later, when everyone was up to speed on the situation, the silence in the bakery was deafening. Emily was the first to speak, with the indignation typical of children in the face of obvious injustices. "This is a lie. Sarah isn't exploited. She's the boss." "Emily is right," said Ms. Grace, but her voice carried a deep concern. "Sarah, my dear, are you sure you want to continue with this? Maybe it's better." "Better what, Grandma?" Sarah retorted, surprising everyone with her firmness. "Better to give up what we've built? Better to pretend that people like me can't be business owners?" "That's not it, my dear. It's just that sometimes we need to choose the battles we can win." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, watching the street activity. Several people passed by carrying bags with the St. Benedict Bakery logo, customers who had become part of her daily routine. "Grandma, do you remember when I wanted to work here for the first time?" "I remember. You were 19 and determined to be independent." "And do you remember what you said?" Ms. Grace smiled sadly. "I said you would have to be twice as good as anyone else to get half the opportunities." "Exactly. And I was. I learned everything about the business, dedicated myself more than any employee, proved my competence every day." Sarah turned to the group. "Now that I finally have something of my own, am I supposed to give up because someone who doesn't even know me decided I'm incapable?" David stood up as well. "Sarah, no one is questioning your ability, but this complaint could destroy everything we've built." "It could," Sarah agreed. "Or it could be our chance to definitively prove that our partnership is legitimate and successful." "How so?" asked Mr. James. Sarah went to the drawer where they kept the document folders and began sorting through papers. "Look at this. Partnership, a contract registered with the notary." With Marina took a deep breath. "I will fight. We will prove that our partnership is not only legitimate, but exemplary." "Marina," David said calmly, "do you understand that this could mean months of investigation, hearings, negative publicity?" "I understand perfectly." Marina looked directly into his eyes. "And do you understand that if we back down now, we will be validating all the prejudices we face?" The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. "Marina is right." Everyone turned to Mr. James, who had been quiet until then. "James," David asked, "when I arrived in America in 1976, many people said that Portuguese was only good for sweeping streets or working construction, that I would never be able to have my own business because I was just an ignorant immigrant." The elderly man adjusted his glasses. "Do you know what I did?" "What?" asked Emily. "I worked harder than any American, saved every penny, learned perfect English, and opened this bakery. And every time someone tried to disqualify me, I showed my work, my results, my dedication." Mr. James stood up and walked over to Marina. "You did the same thing, girl, and now that you've succeeded, there are people who don't want to accept it. So we will show them, and everyone watching, that competence has nothing to do with origin, accent, or special condition." Marina felt her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you, Mr. James." "Don't thank me yet. It's going to be a tough fight." David looked around the bakery, at the tables where they held planning meetings, at the kitchen where Marina had developed innovative recipes, at the walls decorated with certificates and photos of the community they had helped build. "All right," he finally said, "if we're going to fight, let's fight right. I'll hire the best labor lawyer I can find, and I will document everything we do here," added Emily. "I'll film Marina working, take testimonials from clients, create a complete presentation." Ms. Grace sighed deeply. "If you are determined to face this, then I will do my part too." "What part, Grandma?" "I will talk to every neighbor, every regular customer, every supplier. I will make sure everyone knows the truth about what happens here." That afternoon, when they began preparations for the summer festival, there was a different energy in the air. It was no longer just a celebration of a commemorative date. It was a demonstration of strength, an act of resistance, a declaration that they would not back down in the face of institutionalized prejudice. As they hung the colorful flags that Marina had made, each of them knew that the coming months would be crucial not only for the future of the bakery, but for something much larger. The possibility of real change in how society viewed the capabilities of people with disabilities. "Marina," David said, helping her hang the last row of flags, "are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Marina looked at him, then at the bakery they had built together, then at Emily and Miss Grace, who were decorating the tables with checkered tablecloths. "David, 3 years ago, when I started working here, my biggest dream was to be respected as an employee. Today, I am a businesswoman, partner, product developer, and manager of people." She paused. "If I don't fight for this now, when will I fight?" David nodded slowly. "Then let's show them what we are capable of." "Let's," Marina agreed. "And we will win." The Tuesday morning was cloudy and cold when Marina arrived at the bakery and found a surprise that left her speechless. A line of at least 30 people stretched along the sidewalk of Smith Street. It wasn't a line of customers, it was too early for that. They were neighbors, regular customers, local merchants, all carrying signs, banners, and a determination she had never seen before. "Marina!" shouted Ms. Smith, waving from the middle of the crowd. "We came to support you." Mr. James appeared running from inside the bakery, clearly emotional. "Marina, girl, you need to see this. The whole city has learned about the injustice they are doing to us." Marina walked slowly down the line of supporters, recognizing familiar faces and discovering others she had never seen in person. There were mothers of students who participated in Emily's study groups, local merchants, municipal school employees. Even Dr. Albert Smith was there, wearing a medical coat and carrying a banner that read, "Competence has no syndrome, prejudice does." Dr. Albert, how did you find out? Marina, this morning I woke up to 15 messages on WhatsApp from fellow doctors telling me about your situation, he explained, clearly indignant. I made it a point to cancel my first appointment to be here. A young woman with curly hair approached, carrying a portable microphone and accompanied by a cameraman. Marina Johnson, I'm Julia Roberts from Channel 7 News. Can we talk quickly? Our team wants to document what is happening here. Marina looked around, still trying to process the situation. How did you find out? Social media, dear, explained Ms. Francis, Dr. Albert's housekeeper, who was there with her whole family. The bakery boy, that David, posted last night explaining the situation, and his daughter Emily made a video that has already been shared over 5,000 times. At that moment, David came running down the street, clearly agitated and surprised by the crowd. Marina, did you see the response? The bakery's Instagram gained 1,000 followers since yesterday. David, what did you do? We didn't do anything but tell the truth, replied Emily, appearing beside her father with a cell phone in hand and a satisfied expression. I recorded a video explaining our entire story from your first meeting to the bakery partnership. And Dad wrote a beautiful piece about prejudice and professional competence. Ms. Grace arrived at that moment, coming from the opposite direction of the street, accompanied by at least 15 ladies from the neighborhood, all neighbors that Sarah recognized by sight but had never spoken to personally. Sarah, my daughter, said Ms. Grace, emotional. All these women wanted to come show their support. Miss Kida stopped me at the grocery store last night, Miss Vera called me in the early morning, and Miss Lucy knocked on our door at 6 this morning. One of the ladies, a black woman around 60 years old, stepped forward. Sarah, my name is Miss Sedalia. I've lived on the street behind us for 30 years. I want you to know that we are outraged by this accusation. My granddaughter has cerebral palsy, and seeing a young woman like you building an independent life gives us hope. That's true, agreed another lady. My son has autism, and you all are an example that different people can indeed achieve professional success. Reporter Julia approached again. Sarah, can you explain your version of the events? What really happened to generate this complaint? Sarah looked around at all those people who had come out of their homes on a cold morning to support her. She took a deep breath and decided to speak. Julia, I have been a partner in this bakery for 8 months. I invested my savings, participate in all decisions, developed exclusive products, and helped manage our team. Apparently, there is an organization that believes people with Down syndrome are incapable of doing this. And what is your response to this accusation? Sarah gestured to the crowd around her. My response is here. These people know my work, interact with me daily, and know that I am treated as an equal because I am equal. The difference is only in the minds of those who are prejudiced. Dr. Albert stepped forward to speak into the microphone. I have been a pediatrician for 20 years. When I met Sarah, I admit I had prejudices. But in just a few minutes of conversation, she showed me technical knowledge, business insight, and emotional maturity that many business people I know do not have. And I am a math teacher, added a middle-aged woman whom Sarah recognized from the local school. Sarah is our official supplier of special snacks, but more than that. She solves complex logistical problems, negotiates deadlines and prices, and has never failed to meet a commitment. The interview was interrupted by the arrival of 2 black cars. From the first, a man in a well-tailored suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. From the second, an elegant woman accompanied by a young man who looked like an intern. Who just arrived? Asked Emily. David approached the first man. Dr. Martinelli, you arrived quickly. David, this situation is of absolute priority, replied the lawyer, shaking his hand firmly, and from what I see, we have considerable community support. The elegant woman addressed Sarah directly. "Sarah Johnson. My name is Dr. Patricia Lewis. I am a prosecutor specializing in the rights of people with disabilities. I am here to personally understand this complaint." A murmur ran through the crowd. The presence of a prosecutor meant that the situation had gained an official dimension. "Doctor," said Sarah, maintaining her composure, "it will be a pleasure to clarify any doubts you may have." "Great. Can we talk inside the establishment? I would like to see the facilities and check the documentation." During the next hour, while Dr. Patricia meticulously examined all the partnership documents, interviewed employees, and observed Sarah in action, the crowd outside grew even larger. Merchants from other regions arrived, university students, and even some city council members. Emily, naturally taking on the role of organizer, managed to get the crowd to form groups, each preparing written testimonials about their experiences with Sarah and the bakery. "Sarah," called Dr. Patricia after finishing her analysis, "can I speak with you privately?" They headed to the small room at the back of the bakery that served as an office. "Sarah, I'll be direct. This complaint was made by an organization I had not heard of until yesterday. I did some investigations and found out that it was created only 3 months ago, has a single registered member, and the address provided is that of an empty commercial space." Sarah felt a mix of relief and indignation. "So it's a false complaint?" "Worse than that. It's a malicious complaint made by someone who clearly does not know your real situation." The prosecutor closed the briefcase. "Sarah, based on what I saw here today, your documentation, your professional competence, the community support, the financial results of the business, I can categorically state that there is no irregularity." "And now?" "Now, I will recommend the immediate dismissal of the complaint. More than that, I will use your case as a positive example of successful professional inclusion." Sarah felt her legs go weak with relief. "Doctor, may I ask one thing?" "Of course." "Who made the complaint? Why?" Dr. Patricia hesitated for a moment. "I cannot provide specific details, but I can say that there are indications it was someone with personal, not institutional motivations." Sarah immediately thought of David's former colleagues, but decided not to speculate aloud. When they returned to the main area of the bakery, they found David organizing a real operation. There were makeshift tables where people were signing a petition of support, a corner where Emily was collecting video testimonials, and even a small table where Miss Grace was serving free coffee to all supporters. "So?" asked David anxiously. "Case dismissed," announced Dr. Patricia loudly for everyone to hear. The explosion of joy was immediate. Applause, hugs, cheers of celebration. Emily ran to hug Sarah, followed by Mr. James, Miss Grace, and David. "Sarah," said Dr. Albert, approaching, "can I make a proposal?" "Of course." "Doctor, I would like to organize a talk on professional inclusion at the hospital where I work, with you as the keynote speaker. Do you think you would agree?" Sarah looked around at all the people who had dedicated their mornings to support her, at the prosecutor who had taken the time to personally check on the situation, at David and Emily who had mobilized a real campaign in her defense. "Dr. Albert, I would agree not just to one talk, but as many as necessary, because today I learned that when we have a community that believes in us, any battle can be won." Reporter Julia approached for one last comment. "Sarah, what message would you like to leave for people who might be going through similar situations?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. "Never let others define your limits. Work hard, be competent, build genuine relationships, and always have the courage to fight for what is right. And remember, the true disability lies in the minds of those who cannot see the potential in people." As the crowd began to disperse, already late in the morning, Sarah remained on the sidewalk watching the street return to its normal flow. Miss Smith passed by and gave her a tight hug. "Sarah, dear, today you didn't just defend yourself. You defended all of us who are underestimated for being different." In the afternoon, when they finally sat down to process everything that had happened, David asked, "Sarah, how do you feel?" She thought for a few moments before answering. "You know, David, this morning I was afraid of losing everything we built. Now I feel like we gained something much bigger, the certainty that we are not alone in this fight." "And what is the next step?" asked Emily. Sarah smiled, looking at her chosen family. "The next step is to continue doing what we have always done, working hard, treating people with respect, and proving every day that competence has nothing to do with appearance or special conditions. And perhaps," added Mr. James, "helping others build their own dreams too." "Exactly," agreed Sarah. "Definitely that." The sound of drums echoed through the streets of Brooklyn as the parade group, Joy St. Benedict, organized for the last day of the parade. It was a sunny February morning, and Sarah adjusted the makeshift microphone they had set up on the community float. Actually, a truck borrowed from Mr. Brown at the beverage distributor, decorated with colorful flags and equipped with a sound system that Emily herself had helped install. Exactly 14 months had passed since that first meeting at the Culture Cafe, and Sarah could hardly recognize the person she had been that day. Wearing a traditional dress made by Miss Grace, white with golden details and a skirt that swirled in the wind, she finally felt like the protagonist of her own story. "Sarah, are you ready?" asked David, approaching dressed as a Brazilian street performer, a costume that Emily had insisted he wear. "The crowd is waiting." She looked at the gathering of the parade group, hundreds of people of all ages, many of whom had supported the bakery during the legal crisis. Months ago, there were entire families, local merchants, municipal school staff, Dr. Albert with his family, Miss Smith and her friends, and even Dr. Patricia, the prosecutor who had become a regular at the St. Benedict bakery. "Dad, look at how many people came," exclaimed Emily, dressed as a clown and carrying a flag with the St. Benedict bakery logo. "I think there are over 1,000 people." Mr. James appeared beside them, wearing a traditional Portuguese costume he had saved since the 80s. At 69, he radiated an energy he hadn't had in decades. "Sarah, girl, did you see the TV crew that just arrived? It seems our parade has become news." It was true. Julia Roberts, the reporter who had covered the crisis, was there with a small team, documenting what had become much more than a parade. It was a celebration of community, inclusion, and overcoming. Ms. Grace climbed onto the truck with the surprising agility of her 79 years, wearing a Carmen Miranda costume that made her look 20 years younger. "My granddaughter, it's time for you to speak to this whole crowd," she said, handing the microphone to Sarah. "And I want you to remember one thing. You are not speaking just for yourself. You are speaking for all the people who have ever been underestimated and need to see that it is possible to win." Sarah held the microphone with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from emotion. She looked at the colorful crowd stretching for several blocks, then at her chosen family around her, then at the St. Benedict bakery she could see in the distance, with its renewed facade and a line of customers even on parade day. "Everyone," she began, and her voice echoed through the speakers, causing the crowd to gradually quiet down. 14 months ago, I asked a question to someone I had just met. A question that changed my life and, it seems, the lives of many people here today." The crowd was paying full attention, and Sarah could see smiling faces, some teary eyes, people holding hands. "I asked if I still deserved to be happy. It was a question that lived in my mind because when we are different, We grow up hearing that we have to settle for less, that we have to be grateful for the opportunities that come our way, that we have to accept the place that others choose for us. David moved closer, standing just below the truck where she could see him clearly. His encouraging smile made her continue with more strength. But today, 14 months later, I want to give the answer to that question, and I want everyone here to hear it, especially the children, the young people, the people who might be asking the same question. Sarah took a deep breath and raised the microphone closer to her lips. The question was never whether I deserve to be happy. The question was having the courage to create my own happiness, to work for it, to fight for it, to not accept that others decide for me what I can or cannot do. A cheer rose from the crowd, followed by enthusiastic applause. Today, I am a partner in a growing company. I have a family that I chose and who chose me back. I help others achieve their dreams, and most importantly, I wake up every day knowing that my life has purpose and meaning. The applause grew louder, and Sarah saw people hugging, some crying tears of joy. But I didn't achieve this alone. I succeeded because I found people who saw my potential before they saw my condition. I succeeded because I live in a community that supports instead of judges. I succeeded because I refused to accept the limits that were imposed on me. Emily climbed onto the truck and held Sarah's hand, shouting into the microphone, "And you succeeded because you are amazing." The crowd laughed and applauded even louder. "So, to everyone here today," Sarah continued, her voice gaining maximum strength, "I want you to know you deserve to be happy. You deserve to pursue your dreams. You deserve respect and equal opportunities. And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, fight. Prove them wrong. Build your own stories." The sound that rose from the crowd was deafening. Applause, cheers, whistles, drums beating in an increasing rhythm. David climbed onto the truck and took the microphone for a moment. "Everyone, I want to thank you for teaching me something fundamental, that the best encounters in life happen when we let go of our prejudices and embrace unexpected possibilities." "And now," shouted Mr. James, also climbing onto the truck, "let's show all of New York how our community knows how to celebrate." The music began to play, and the parade group started to move. Sarah remained on the float, waving to the crowd, feeling the wind on her face and the warmth of the New York sun. Colorful confetti fell like tropical snow. Music echoed between the buildings, and a contagious joy filled the entire area. As the parade moved through the streets of Brooklyn, Sarah observed the changes that had occurred in the past year. St. Benedict Bakery had inspired other inclusive businesses in the area. Miss Smith had hired a young person with autism for her clothing store. Dr. Albert had created an internship program for people with disabilities at the hospital. The local school had developed a pedagogical project based on true inclusion. "Sarah," shouted Emily over the sound of the music, "look over there." Sarah followed the girl's gaze and saw on the sidewalk a group of children of various ages waving enthusiastically. Among them, she recognized some faces from the math classes she taught at the bakery, but there were others she didn't know. The float stopped for a few minutes, and one of the children approached, a girl of about 10 years, wearing glasses and a t-shirt that said "Future Engineer." "Sarah," shouted the girl, "I want to be like you when I grow up." "What do you mean, dear?" "I want to have my own business and show that girls can be anything they want." Sarah crouched at the edge of the truck to get closer to the girl. "And what will your business be?" "I will make robots that help people with disabilities gain more independence." Sarah's heart filled with an emotion she could hardly name. It was pride, hope, gratitude, and a deep sense that her struggle had been worth it. "You know what I'm sure of," Sarah said to the girl, "that you will succeed, and when you do, I want to be your first customer." When the parade reached the end of the route at the central square of Brooklyn, there was a surprise waiting, an improvised stage where several people took turns speaking about inclusion, opportunities, and the importance of combating prejudice. Dr. Patricia spoke about changes in legislation. Dr. Albert discussed accessibility in the medical field. Representatives from other local businesses announced inclusive hiring programs. But it was Ms. Grace who concluded the speeches, stepping onto the stage with the dignity of her nearly 80 years and the wisdom of someone who had raised a granddaughter against all odds. "My dears," she said, her voice fragile but clear into the microphone, "I raised Sarah alone since she was a baby. I faced doctors who said she would never be independent, teachers who said she would never learn properly, people who said I was wasting my time investing in her education." The crowd was completely silent. Today, at 79 years old, I can say that the greatest joy of my life was refusing to believe those people. It was betting on my granddaughter's potential. It was teaching her that the only opinion that matters about her abilities is her own. Ms. Grace paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Sarah, my daughter, you answered your question so beautifully that you can't even imagine. You not only deserve to be happy, you are helping hundreds of other people discover that they also deserve." When Ms. Grace stepped down from the stage, Sarah hugged her tightly, feeling the familiar scent of talcum powder and coffee that had comforted her since childhood. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for never giving up on me. I thank you, my daughter, for giving me the chance to see you soar." As the sun set over New York and the city lights began to turn on, Sarah found herself sitting at one of the tables in St. Benedict Bakery with her chosen family. David telling carnival anecdotes, Emily already planning next year's parade, Mr. James organizing the photos they had taken throughout the day, and Ms. Grace quietly sewing while listening to the conversations. "Sarah," David said at one point, "do you remember your question back at the Culture Cafe? How it was like yesterday. And now do you have the complete answer?" Sarah looked around the bakery, at the walls adorned with photos of the community, at the trophies for best bakery in the neighborhood they had won, at the quality certificates proudly displayed, at the busy schedule of special orders, and at the thank you letters from customers. Then she looked at the people around her, at David, who had become not just a partner, but her best friend, and, she suspected, something more that neither of them had the courage to name yet. At Emily, who had become the little sister she had never had. At Mr. James, who had become the professional father guiding her. At Ms. Grace, who had always been her rock and continued to be her safe harbor. "You know, David," she finally said, "I realized that the question was wrong from the start." "What do you mean?" "I asked if I still deserved to be happy, as if happiness was something that other people decide whether you deserve or not. As if it were a permission that needed to be granted." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, watching the nighttime activity of the street that had become her second home. The right question was, am I willing to work for my happiness? Am I willing to fight for it? Am I willing to create the conditions for it to happen? And am I willing to share that happiness with others? She turned back to the group, smiling. And the answer to all those questions is yes, 1,000 times yes. Emily jumped up and ran to hug Sarah. "And we will be here to help you keep being happy." "Forever," agreed David. "Always," confirmed Mr. James. "As long as God gives me life," added Miss Grace. Sarah hugged them all, feeling a deep gratitude for every event that had led to that moment, for the cruel prank that had turned into a transformative encounter, for the prejudices faced that had strengthened her determination, for the challenges overcome that had solidified their friendships, for the battle won that had opened doors for others. Outside, the lights of New York sparkled like earthly stars, and Sarah knew that somewhere in that city there were others, asking the same question she had asked 14 months ago. And now, she not only had the answer, but an entire community willing to help those people discover their own answers. The question that had changed 2 lives had become an answer that could change hundreds more, and that, Sarah knew, was just the beginning.